I read a quote recently that said that homeschool is racist and it's a plot by evangelicals to kill the public schools. And I have a feeling that as the executive producer of this film and the father of homeschooled kids himself, Kirk Cameron has some surprising answers to those stereotypes and accusations all about homeschooling. Kirk Cameron coming up in just 1 minute on Channel Mom. He's got a famous face and a famous name. I'm going to hold up his picture for our YouTube audience. He has starred in movies like Left Behind and Fireproof, and also as Mike Seaver in the 1980s sitcom Growing Pains. But our guest today recently added a notch to his resume as the executive producer of a new documentary called The Homeschool Awakening. Yeah, Kirk, I have a feeling, and I want you to explain this now, that one of the reasons that you made this movie, one of the primary reasons, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is because of the perceptions that are erroneous about homeschooling. And I'm going to read you a quick quote that I read from a columnist on MSNBC who said that there's racism behind homeschooling. And what she said was they see homeschooling as a way to cut the government out of educating Christian children and prepare them to take their place in a theocratic government.
We could get into the fact that government has no place in education. The National Department of Education is actually something that's, who am I to say this, right? But just go read the Constitution yourself. It's actually prohibited by the Constitution in the 10th Amendment.
Yeah.
So no one's cutting government out of legitimate education. Government has no legitimate place in education according to the Constitution. Our country wasn't founded that way. And that system is becoming increasingly hostile toward the kinds of faith and values parents want to teach their children.
Yeah.
And so the Homeschool Awakening is really about parents taking back the leadership role in the development of the hearts and minds of our kids.
And, hearts is the key there. Because, that I think is something that gets to a certain degree ignored, or there's a false sense of taking care of the heart sometimes in public schools. I recently read that there are about 3.7 million homeschool students in the United States, and that may be growing. So it's roughly 6 to 7% of school-age children, according to the statistic. But here's what happened, the pandemic. And it awakened a lot of parents to what was going on in public school. And they wanted to have more of an influence the more they found out about what was going on in public and private schools. But I have a big admission for you, Kirk. My husband is a public school superintendent. So I sent my children to public school knowing that my husband was watching over them. He's also a principal. It's a small enough district that he can be principal and superintendent. Knowing that he was watching over them. Now, I did a lot of training at home. I worked with them on their biblical knowledge and prayer and all kinds of things so that I had a moral influence on them and a spiritual influence on them. But I sent them to public school. What do you think of that?
Well, hey, I have an admission too. Not only did I go to public school, but my dad is a public school teacher. My grandmother's a public school teacher, and my grandpa's a public school teacher. There are good teachers in that system. There's great superintendents and principals like your husband in the system. The problem is they're not the ones deciding curriculum. The government is, and the government is working against good parents and teachers and principals and superintendents. And if your public school is still a good one and you're able to do that, that is awesome. But you're the very rare minority, and I don't think it's going to last long because as the government becomes more and more authoritarian in their mandates and in their restrictions, this is what we're facing. And good parents, teachers, and families are looking for hope. They're looking for options. And we can't get these years back with our kids. We've got one shot at parenting. If we farm it out to a system that's teaching our kids to hate our God and our country and get them to question the most fundamental things like whether or not they're a boy or a girl and choose their own pronouns, we're in trouble.
But the thing that you express in this movie, and I kind of want you to go off on this, is the great privilege that we have as parents to mold the hearts of our children toward compassion and toward hope and toward peace and toward grace and toward love. And those are things you can't really teach in that public school environment very well.
Everybody has, lives in a different situation. You have different options, and you do the best you can with what you have. And we learn as we grow, and as we find more light, we want to move toward that light. And today's public school system is different than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's rapidly changing.
Yeah.
Think of how different the world was 3 years ago before the pandemic hit, and that has changed so much. And education is where you can see it so clearly. It's amazing what happens when parents take back the idea that it's ours to choose what kind of curriculum. It's ours to choose processes. We can focus on our kids' strengths and their giftings from God. We don't have to have a hands-off approach, sort of like, well, we don't know because we don't have a degree, we're not qualified. Yes, you are. You're their mom. You're their dad. There's no one who's more qualified. You've been teaching them since day one, and no one loves them more than you do. So you choose the educational path. For some, that may be public school. For some, it may be private school. And for some, and for the homeschool community, it's increased 60% since 2020.
Oh.
And so millions of families are successfully finding that not only are they getting away from what they don't like in a bad school system, they're actually discovering the joy of being together as a family and this thing called discipleship. And it's like, oh, this is just being a family and learning together with the world as our classroom.
Here's what I loved, is I think maybe it was your wife that said it in the film. This is doing life and the freedom to do life and learn how to take care of animals, or learn how to cook, or learn how to fly a plane, or learn about artwork in other cultures, or learn how to relate in other cultures. I mean, these people were getting to do, and they didn't have to be rich to do it. You made that clear. And I think a lot of people have that perception. And you made it clear that there are different races and different classes and different backgrounds that come into the homeschooling genre. This is what a fabulous thing. It opens up the world to our children, and it opens us up to our children and the time we spend with them. Now, let's get to what people say as the negatives of homeschooling. You know, they're not socialized, or the parent isn't sophisticated enough or educated enough to really get them prepared for college. What about some of those things?
What I want for my kids is for them to be in community, not just with kids their own age, pooling all of the wisdom of all of the other 13-year-olds, which is kind of hard to find, but actually benefiting from the wisdom of older kids, and older kids teaching younger kids, and students learning how to interact with adults and experience the world around them. That's the kind of socialization where they're actually social in the real world, not in this monoculture of 12-year-olds or 16-year-olds, learning how to drink, have sex, and deny the faith that actually leads to their blessing.
Yeah.
I want them in a culture that many homeschool communities provide, which is all the stuff I want them to learn. And that results in well-rounded, initiative-taking, outside-the-box thinking, knowledge-loving kids who actually do really well in college. And colleges, actually, many of them prefer kids who are homeschooled if their parents are all in with it, because of those kinds of qualities.